Hi everyone, so we've had some breaking news this week in chess that Vladimir Kramnik actually coached Firouzja ahead of the Candidates tournament. Now I wasn't aware of this, and it's an interesting development because Kramnik was quite critical of Alireza in some commentary he did on the Candidates for a Russian speaking channel. Now I only just saw this story here, so I wanted to share with you a couple of details from the story and then also show you just a phenomenal game that Vladimir Kramnik played himself back in 2018, just to give you a sense of the calibre of the man, and of course who doesn't love a daily dose of epic chess. But on with this story here. So I read this one on Chess24, written by a guy called Colin McGaughty, a journalist from the UK it looks like. But okay, so Kramnik was on Team Firouzja. So I'm not going to read this whole thing here. I'll link the article in the video description if you want to check it out. But if I come down here, there's this podcast which has actually been started. So at this point here, so Jan Gustafsson, we've got Laurent Fresinet, Nielsen, Peter Heine Nielsen, all pretty well-known guys. They do commentary. They've started off this podcast called the Chicken Chess Club. I've not listened to them all yet. I briefly listened to this one. But this is the key thing. So the revelation came in the latest episode of this podcast, and this is where Laurent Fresinet revealed, we now know with whom he, Alireza, prepared. It became public knowledge. It was Kramnik and Shaparinov. At the very least, French GM Sébastien Mazet saw Kramnik on some beach in the south of France, and okay, he was a bit surprised, and then he said, sure, I'm training with Alireza, and then Mazet just visited them in their house where they were renting for one of their training camps, and so it was completely public. So I find this really interesting actually, that Alireza was working with someone. I saw a couple of you mention in the comments recently, you know, he needs a professional coach, he needs professional management. Someone actually mentioned Kramnik. So apparently he has been working with Kramnik, but certainly going forward, I think he definitely needs these big names to support his chess if he wants to kick on to that absolutely elite level, compete for the World Championship in future. But do let me know your thoughts. I'm keen to understand, you know, does Alireza need someone like Big Vlad or someone similar to take him on? Who do you think he should be working with? And just to come down briefly here to finish this piece off, so it looks like we're not actually sure if they're still working together. You know, maybe Kramnik got fired if Alireza was angry when he was giving him some stick in the Russian commentary channel about, you know, how well he's been playing. He made some comments apparently that, you know, that's not the play of a number 2 or 3 in the world. And it is true that some of Alireza's play, like against Nepomniachtchi, was just not up to that scratch, that level. So okay, we're not sure who he's working with right now. But if anyone has any insight, really keen to understand. Now on with the actual chess here, I want to share with you a beautiful game played between Vladimir Kramnik and Levon Aronian from the 2018 Candidates, so I'll bring you that one now. Okay, so here we go. This is the Candidates 2018. Big Vlad has black. Let's see what he can do here. So e4 from Aronian. We go down these opening moves now of the Rory Lopez with bishop to b5, and now knight f6 was played, the Berlin defense. And this game's actually known as the Berlin Airlift when you look at it on chessgames.com. So we now had pawn to d3, so not castles inviting the whole Berlin endgame where the queens come off the board. Instead, in this position, we keep more pieces on the board. Vlad goes bishop c5. We now had takes on c6. This isn't forced, there are different ways to play. But this is quite a positional, slow, manoeuvring way to play. You clarify the pawn structure, and then in the game between Alireza Firouzja and Fabiana Caruana in the final round of this year's Candidates 2022, we had this exact position, and here Fabi actually played knight to d2 there. Now you don't take this pawn, by the way, or then black comes here with the queen. You hit the knight and threaten mate, and white's just busted, completely lost. But what we have here from Aronian is an immediate castle, so not bringing the knight out like Fabi did. And now this pawn is genuinely attacked, so Vlad defends it with queen to e7. And now here Aronian plays imprecisely. So he should actually keep developing here with knight b to d2, and then he can bring it to c4 and just start kind of playing in the centre immediately with pawn c3, d4, that kind of thing, if Vlad went for this plan. But what he does is pawn h3. Now Vlad goes for this really aggressive kingside attacking plan. He goes rook to g8 here. He hasn't castled the king. And because Levon's gone pawn h3, this can now be used as a hook to rip open the position. So already Levon's on the back foot here, and he goes king to h1, not the best. He probably should have started going c3 to try and drum up central counterplay against this flank attack. And now knight h5 played, clears the line for the queen so that it can support this g5 push. Now we had c3 from Levon, g5 comes anyway, and now here you can go d4, but then we capture, pawn recaptures, drop the bishop back. It's just a bit slow for white. You know, this is a ready-made attack. That move is still coming. So what we had instead was a captures here on e5. Now, if you recapture with the queen, this is no good because you lose the knight on h5. You know, you opened up this attack when you took with the knight here. But what we had instead was pawn to g4 here, blocking that attack of the queen, ignoring this piece for the moment, and you can't actually go capturing this one. I mean, say you take this one with the knight here, well then the bishop can recapture, the pawn has to take back, and then we check here. This is actually leading to mate as soon as you rip open the h-file, because now the knight hops in, using this pinned pawn. This is just mate in one on the next move. So that's why you can't actually take this one here with the knight. Instead, we had pawn d4 played. This time the bishop drops back to this dangerous diagonal, also pressures the knight. And I'm just drawing this arrow with the queen here because the queen wants to actually bounce out to this square if it can, then start putting pressure on the h3 pawn. And that's why g3 was played. Important move, stops the queen coming there, and also tries to keep things closed on the g-file here. So Vlad wants to keep an initiative going here, so he chops on e5 with the bishop, the pawn recaptures, and now he doesn't take here with the pawn. Then once again you're hanging your unprotected knight here. So instead we had captures on e5, Levon goes queen to d4, naturally trying to exchange queens, stave off the attack. And actually when you run this with the engine, one of its top moves here is just chopping off, playing this endgame a pawn up. But Vlad doesn't go for this, no chance at all. He wants blood in this position, so he drops the queen back to e7. Now h4 played, very logical, trying to keep lines closed. And now pawn c5. Great move, dislodging that powerful queen. And you can't go say queen to d5 here, hitting this unprotected knight. Or when it drops back, it hits both of these squares. You know, the pawn will be dropping soon. You're picking up tempos against the queen, not good. So instead it came to c4 here. Now you're walking straight into bishop e6. Don't forget the queen's also trying to hold this pawn from the attack of this queen in the earlier position. But what Levon had planned here was this check on b5. Now after c6, you can't take here of course, the queen laterally defends. And so Levon drops the queen back here, but this is actually a big blunder. He should drop back to d3 with the queen. The key reason is that you're trying to stop this f5 break, because now if black goes f5, you can actually take that pawn and it's not quite as powerful in this position. Yes, you could give this check here, but then the king just hides on h2 and actually white's doing okay. So that's why you wouldn't have been able to go f5 with the queen on d3. Instead, you'd have had to hit it like this, but then it can slide to e3. You know, you're still kind of preventing this move because then the queens would come off. So d3 was the square, but Levon goes queen to a4, and now Vlad can achieve this f5 move, and it's just a very powerful move, because if you capture that pawn, well now you're just getting killed on the king side here. So because the queen's not on d3 defending laterally, well you could actually take here with check, the pawn recaptures, then you check like this, king g1, and this time you can invade with the queen to e2. Once again, the queen's not there blocking this square. And this is actually just leading to a forced mate. If you go rook f2, then we check. If you come here, well, we take your rook. If you bring the rook back, this is mate. So, okay, it's all completely over. So you can't actually be taking this pawn on f5 after Vlad pushes that one. And that's why bishop g5 was played, developing with tempo against the queen. But you can imagine what Vlad played here. Do pause if you want to guess the move. So here Vlad simply plays rook takes on g5. Very thematic exchange sack, getting rid of that powerful piece, and also opening the h-file here, which is significant in a lot of positions once you've recaptured this pawn. So pawn f4 was now played by Vlad. He didn't even take back here immediately. He actually wants to keep this pawn on e4, start pressuring here, and you don't want to be taking. Again, after knight takes on f4, it's just completely busted with the queen taking on g5 and then coming to the h-file. So we didn't have captures. The queen came back to d1. Levon's desperately scrambling, trying to defend his king. And now we had rook to d8 hitting the queen. It came over to c1 here. And now the plus of this move is that after Vlad takes on g3, at least the queen now defends this pawn from the king for just a moment. But we didn't have recaptures here. Then you're coming in with check, winning the rook. Still a massive attack. So instead, Levon leaves that one. He goes knight a3, desperate to develop a piece. But now rook d3 from Vlad. Excellent move. Once again, there are all sorts of threats like take here and sliding the rook across. So many pieces in the attack. So rook d1 was played, trying to get rid of that active piece. And now this is where Vlad comes up with truly an exceptional move. Again, please do pause and try and find the move in this position. So this is where Vlad plays bishop to d5. And it's really reminiscent of the game which Vishy Anand played against Levon Aronian, his immortal game played in Tartar Steel 2013, where he's just giving pieces to actually rip open a diagonal to the king. That's the whole point. So if you take that bishop, after the queen checks here, it's just completely over. Say king g1, then you can take with check, king takes, and then there's so many different ways to mate the king, but sliding the rook across is one way to do it. Even after you pin the queen to the king here, well, then we start checking. And after the king goes, we can go like this. This is mate. If you come to f1, same mate, none of it works. So it's just very beautiful. If you actually take the bishop, then the queen comes in. Same problems if you take the rook. Queen comes in. It's just completely hopeless, completely lost. So that's why f3 was tried, to keep this diagonal closed. But then we actually just take on f3. This is what Vlad did. Again, if you take the rook here, there are huge problems on this diagonal. And if you take the bishop, which is what we had in the game, well, then the queen can now come to e2. Yes, the rook pins the queen to the king, stops these checkmating threats for just a moment, but it's all in vain. Because after Kramnik pushed pawn to g2 check, here Aronian actually resigned the game. Because wherever the king goes, it's just getting hunted. I mean, say it came to g1 here. Well, you can push this one with check. Now you could take, or you could try and hide out here. Either way, then you're getting mated. No matter how you look at it, this is one sample line. Rook captures, and now you don't even take the rook. You can actually just promote this one. You can make it literally any piece you want. I mean, you could do a bishop, for example. And now the king's got nowhere to go. If it comes here, we mate like this. If instead the rook blocks, okay, we mate like this. So it's just game over. Beautiful game by Vladimir Kramnik. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to see another amazing game in this line between Firouzja and Caruana, then click here. Thanks very much for watching and see you soon.